6 years ago, Emily Tran stood outside the Lancaster Enterprises boardroom in a second-hand blazer and borrowed heels, heart-pounding with ambition and rejection. Back then, her Aunt Caroline told her plainly, "You don't quite fit the Lancaster mold." Her cousin David smirked from across the table, delivering the final insult. "You're smart, but not our kind of smart." Fast forward to today, and that same boardroom is filled with whispers and wide eyes. Because Emily didn't just walk back in for another shot, she walked in as the CEO of Titan Vantage Group, the silent majority client keeping Lancaster afloat. For years, her tech firm funneled over $60 million a year through their logistics arm, propping up the very empire that once deemed her unworthy. As the family praised themselves for success, tied to an anchor client, they had no clue the woman funding their survival was the same one they cast aside. Emily watched them pat each other's backs while hiding losses, forging numbers, and propping up egos on a crumbling foundation. Until today. Today, she stepped forward, not with vengeance, but with facts, contracts, and control. And when David asked, stunned, "What are you doing here?" her answer was simple. "I own your survival. I'm here to renegotiate." They denied her a seat at the table. She came back owning it. The Lancaster family's annual summit had always been a performance mahogany board tables, overpriced espresso, and thinly veiled arrogance dressed as tradition. 6 years ago, Emily Tran had been fresh out of grad school, dual-degreed, and wide-eyed, hoping for her shot. What she got instead was humiliation. Her Aunt Caroline Lancaster denied her application, publicly citing lack of leadership instincts, while her cousin David smugly added that family legacy mattered more than degrees. She left that day feeling invisible but determined. What no one knew was that Emily didn't go home to lick her wounds. She went to work. With a background in finance and systems engineering, she launched a small consulting firm from her one-bedroom apartment, using everything she learned and everything they said she lacked to quietly build something real. She rebranded the company as Titan Vantage Group, an enterprise that started as a shell but became the largest client of Lancaster Enterprises, without them ever knowing who was behind it. Now, 6 years later, Emily walked into that same boardroom, this time in a tailored navy suit poised unreadable, as her cousin David clicked through a PowerPoint bragging about their largest revenue stream contracts with Titan Vantage. Emily suppressed a smile. The numbers were real. What wasn't real, the success David claimed. His data was doctored, metrics inflated, and shortfalls buried. The only thing keeping the Lancaster empire afloat was the company he had no idea Emily owned. When it was Emily's turn to speak, the temperature shifted. "I'm here representing Titan Vantage Group. We need to renegotiate all contracts before renewal," she announced calmly. Confusion washed over the room. Her aunt blinked in disbelief. David stuttered. "That's not how this works," Caroline said sharply. "Titan Vantage sends a rep from the external division." Emily smiled. "They do, and you're looking at her." Gasps followed. Styluses dropped. David turned pale. Emily tapped her tablet, projecting audited financials. Titan Vantage generated triple the annual revenue of Lancaster Group, with contracts that made up 82% of Lancaster's logistics revenue. "This is impossible," David muttered. "You run a startup," Emily corrected. "I built this from the ground up while you were busy polishing the family crest." Then came the audit. With her analysts planted quietly within Lancaster operations over the years, Emily laid out everything: fraudulent numbers, hidden losses, ghost clients. It wasn't just a betrayal of business ethics. It was negligence that bordered on criminal. The room fell into chaos. Legal counsel whispered. Board members demanded clarity. Caroline's calm shattered. "I'm calling for an emergency audit meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m., Emily said. My team will present a full forensic review of your financials. I suggest you come prepared." When David tried to accuse her of revenge, she simply replied, "This isn't revenge. It's business. The same business you said I'd never understand." The next day, Emily returned and gave them two choices: restructure leadership and keep a scaled-down version of her contracts, or lose everything and deal with federal scrutiny for fraudulent reporting. Within hours, David resigned. Caroline retired, and the board agreed to full oversight under Emily's terms. Standing in what would soon be her new CEO office, Emily reread the rejection letter Caroline had sent her 6 years prior, the one that said she lacked leadership potential. She printed it, framed it, and placed it on her new desk, not as a trophy, but a reminder, because sometimes the best kind of success doesn't come from proving others wrong. It comes from becoming so powerful they have no choice but to acknowledge it. And as for the family business that once shut her out, it now reports to her. 6 years ago, Emily Tran stood in the sleek marble lobby of Lancaster Enterprises, her resume in hand and a heart full of ambition. Fresh from graduate school, with dual degrees in finance and systems engineering, she had returned home hopeful. She thought her credentials and dedication would open doors. Instead, she was met with laughter. "I just don't think you're Lancaster material," her Aunt Caroline Lancaster had said that day, in front of the entire board. Her cousin David smirked. "It's not about degrees, Em. It's about blood and pedigree." Those words stayed with Emily, but instead of breaking her, they became fuel. She left quietly that afternoon, but behind the scenes, she started building. From her tiny apartment, she launched a consulting firm under a shell name, Titan Vantage Group. It began small with one contract, then two. She poured her technical knowledge into building systems that helped companies thrive. Slowly, Titan Vantage grew internationally, profitably, invisibly. By the time she was 30, Emily had acquired global clients and revenues that dwarfed the Lancaster Group's. And in a strategic masterstroke, Titan Vantage became the Lancaster Group's largest logistics client without them ever knowing who was behind the curtain. Until now. At the annual Lancaster Executive Summit, Emily returned not as the forgotten niece, but as the CEO of the company keeping their books afloat. When David stood in front of the board, bragging about the growth their anchor client had brought in, Emily nearly laughed. "That anchor client is me," she finally said, standing at the head of the boardroom table. Shock rippled across the room. Caroline went pale. David stood frozen. "That's not possible," he sputtered. Emily tapped her screen. Up popped a detailed breakdown, Titan Vantage Revenue International branches, and dependent statistics. Lancaster Group was hanging by a thread, and that thread was Titan Vantage. The room turned silent as board members began flipping through their copies of the internal audit Emily's team had compiled. The Truth Lancaster Group had been hemorrhaging money for over a year. David had been falsifying reports, inflating metrics, burying losses under miscellaneous operations. Emily's team analysts she'd quietly placed over the past 5 years had it all documented. "You're not just endangering the company," Emily said coolly. "You're putting your investors and employees at risk." The room erupted in panic. Caroline demanded a private meeting. David swore he could explain, but Emily wasn't interested in apologies. She laid down 2 options. Option 1, David resigns, an independent leadership board is appointed, and Titan Vantage maintains a scaled-back partnership under strict oversight. Option 2, Emily pulls every contract reports their fraudulent activity to the SEC and lets the Lancaster Group collapse under its own weight. It wasn't personal. It was business. "You once said I didn't belong at this table," Emily told them. "Now you'll sit at mine." By the end of the day, the decision was unanimous. David was out. Caroline took early retirement. The board was restructured, and Titan Vantage, once the faceless client, now guided the company's future. From her new office, formerly Caroline's, Emily watched the harbor turn gold at sunset. On her desk sat the rejection letter from 6 years ago, now framed beside her company's latest international award. She didn't win through revenge. She didn't fight to prove them wrong. She simply built something they couldn't ignore. Because sometimes when the door slams shut, you don't wait around trying to get back in. You build your own damn building and make them knock. The first time Natalie Chen walked into Lancaster Group's towering headquarters, she was 24, fresh out of grad school, with 2 Ivy League degrees and a dream to help her family's company thrive. But her ambition was met not with opportunity, but with arrogance. Her Aunt Victoria Lancaster, the icy matriarch of the empire, barely glanced at her resume before declaring her not quite Lancaster material. Her cousin Derek smirked and added, "It's not about talent, Nat. It's about being born into the right rooms." They dismissed her. Natalie didn't argue. She walked away quietly, but not empty-handed. She walked away with a plan. 6 years later, she returned. Not as a junior applicant, not as the girl they rejected, but as the CEO of Meridian X, a global logistics powerhouse quietly responsible for over 80% of Lancaster Group's logistics revenue. The twist they never knew. Natalie had built Meridian X under a shell company using early earnings from her first software solution. Her team grew discreetly, her client list expanding into Fortune 500 territory. By the time she had her first international office, she was already Lancaster Group's biggest client, funneling over $60 million per year through their logistics division. So when she was invited to the family's executive summit, she accepted not as a niece, but as the woman who held their future in her hands. Derek, now wearing a tailored suit and delivering an embellished PowerPoint, was mid-speech when he proudly credited the company's growth to our partnership with Meridian X. Natalie, sipping her espresso, could barely contain a smile. Moments later, she stepped to the podium. "I'm here to discuss Meridian X's contract renewal," she said calmly. The room stilled. Victoria's brow furrowed. "Meridian X doesn't send principals to these meetings." Natalie smiled. "They do now." The realization hit hard and fast. Derek's face turned pale. Victoria gripped her chair, whispering, "That's not possible." "It's more than possible," Natalie replied, clicking to the first slide of her deck. "It's inevitable. Because while you were busy keeping me out of your club, I was quietly becoming your safety net." The slides told the rest of the story. Meridian X's explosive growth, Lancaster Group's dependency, Derek's falsified numbers. A forensic audit by Natalie's embedded analysts revealed over $8 million in losses masked by creative accounting. She offered the board 2 options. Option 1, Derek resigns. Victoria steps down, and Lancaster Group undergoes a full restructuring under independent oversight. Meridian X remains, but at reduced involvement. Option 2, Natalie pulls every contract, files an SEC complaint, and watches from her waterfront office as the company collapses under its own negligence. Victoria sputtered. Derek begged. Natalie didn't flinch. "You called me unqualified," she said evenly. "But I wasn't trying to fit your mold. I was building my own." By the end of the day, Derek was gone. Victoria was forced into early retirement. The board voted in favor of Natalie's terms. The woman they once mocked was now leading the very company that shut her out. That night in the office, she was told she'd never earn Natalie sat with the rejection email from 6 years earlier, now printed framed and placed beside her firm's quarterly report. She didn't need revenge. She had results. And the legacy they once denied her now reported directly to her. When Natalie Chen was 24, all she wanted was a chance to earn her place at Lancaster Group, the family company she'd admired her entire life. With 2 degrees ahead for systems and an unstoppable work ethic, she applied for a role that could launch her career. But during a boardroom meeting in full view of her powerful Aunt Victoria and smug cousin Derek, she was turned away. "You're bright," they said, "but you're not quite Lancaster material." They didn't see potential, they saw an outsider. What they didn't know, that rejection lit a fire that would reshape their empire. Natalie quietly disappeared from their world, but not from the game. Using a modest inheritance and income from consulting gigs, she built a logistics analytics firm, Vega X Consulting, later rebranded as Meridian X Holdings. She hid behind layers of ownership, used shell companies, and embedded a team of analysts deep within Lancaster Group over the next 6 years. By the time Lancaster Group was boasting of its partnership with the mysterious logistics firm that transformed their bottom line, Natalie was behind the curtain watching every step. When she walked back into their executive summit years later, the room didn't recognize her, not until she took the podium and revealed the truth. She was the CEO of Meridian X, now their largest client, responsible for over 80% of their logistics revenue. And she wasn't there to negotiate gently. The room went still. Derek, who had manipulated internal metrics and disguised millions in shortfalls, turned ghost white. Victoria looked gutted. The board was blindsided. Natalie projected a full financial audit on the screen prepared by her own embedded team. It exposed every flaw in Lancaster's operations, every manipulated line item. More importantly, it exposed the family's complete dependence on Natalie's company. She offered 2 choices. 1, accept full restructuring with Derek resigning, Victoria retiring, and independent oversight taking over Meridian X would remain but under new terms. 2, Natalie walks away, no contracts, no mercy, and full disclosure of Lancaster's falsified accounting to federal regulators. The room exploded with panic. Legal counsel scrambled. Board members argued. But Natalie remained calm. "You called me unqualified," she said, "but I didn't need your seat at the table. I built a new one, and now you'll be reporting to it." In the end, the board caved. Derek resigned. Victoria was pushed out. Lancaster Group was restructured under Natalie's terms. But it wasn't revenge. It was business. Natalie returned to her new corner office, looking out over the San Diego harbor. She printed the old rejection email from Victoria, framed it, and placed it beside Meridian X's latest global growth chart. They once told her she didn't belong. Now they worked for her. And that's the power of being underestimated. It was the kind of morning that should have felt familiar. Same building, same city, same family name etched into the glass. But as Natalie Chen stepped into the Lancaster Group headquarters 6 years after being turned away, everything felt different. She wasn't here as the quiet niece anymore. She wasn't here as a hopeful applicant. Today, she was here as the woman who held their future in her hands. Natalie had spent the last 6 years building Meridian X Holdings into one of the most dominant logistics and infrastructure analytics companies in the country. She used a network of blind investment groups and silent acquisitions to funnel tens of millions through the Lancaster Group, quietly becoming their largest client without revealing who she was. While her Aunt Victoria and cousin Derek laughed at her ambitions, she was embedding herself into the very foundation of their success, and they didn't even know it. That changed the moment Natalie walked into their quarterly board meeting. At first, The Lancaster executives barely looked up, just another outside vendor here to discuss contracts. But then she took the podium and calmly introduced herself. Natalie Chen, she said, CEO of Meridian X Holdings. Silence fell, a few confused glances. Derek blinked. Victoria stiffened. That's not possible, Derek scoffed. You run a small consulting firm. I did, Natalie replied, until I restructured it into a holding company, one that currently provides over 80% of your logistics revenue. What followed was a masterclass in composed authority. Natalie projected audited financials, exposing just how reliant Lancaster Group had become on her infrastructure. Her company had supported their growth, masked their financial shortfalls, and carried the weight of a legacy family business teetering on collapse. But it didn't stop there. With her team of embedded analysts seated behind her, Natalie revealed a full forensic audit of Lancaster's finances data she'd collected quietly over the past 5 years. Derek's manipulation of inventory, falsified client metrics, and hidden operational losses were laid bare. The board was stunned. Victoria tried to object, but Natalie kept going. She offered the board 2 options. 1, restructure under her oversight force. Derek to resign and appoint independent leadership. Meridian X would remain as a scaled-down but stable partner. 2, Natalie walks. Contracts terminated. Data forwarded to regulators. Lancaster Group collapses under its own fraudulent weight. You're doing this to your own family, Derek asked, voice cracking. I'm doing this to protect the people who actually work here, Natalie said, the ones your numbers would have betrayed. Victoria begged for a private conversation. Natalie declined. The board, cornered by evidence and the threat of immediate collapse, chose survival. Derek resigned before the sun set. Victoria was eased into retirement. And just like that, the niece they once dismissed now controlled the legacy they clung to. Natalie didn't do it for revenge. She did it because someone had to fix what they broke and because she'd earned the power to do it right. As she walked into her new corner office, a view of the San Diego harbor in front of her, she pulled out a printed copy of the rejection email Victoria had sent her years ago. She smiled, framed it, set it on her desk, because sometimes success isn't loud or vengeful. Sometimes it's quiet, earned, unshakable. And sometimes the best way to prove your worth is to build something they can't deny, then let them realize you were the one holding them up all along. They once said I wasn't Lancaster material, that I didn't fit the mold. 6 years ago, I stood outside a boardroom where my own family laughed as they denied me a seat at the table. But I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I went out and built my own table instead. Today, I walked into that same building, not as a hopeful niece, but as the CEO of the company that kept their empire afloat. They didn't recognize the power I had quietly grown. They didn't know that while they were polishing their family legacy, I was building one of my own, stronger, sharper, and based on real work, not inheritance. When I revealed the truth, their silence said it all. They had underestimated the wrong woman. This wasn't about revenge, it was about business. It was about showing up for yourself when no one else will. It was about becoming undeniable. Never let someone else's doubt define your path. Rejection isn't the end, it's a redirection. You don't need to fit into their story. You can write your own louder, bolder, and rooted in truth. What they don't see in you doesn't limit your worth. It reveals their blindness. If you've ever been underestimated or overlooked, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below. Your voice matters. And if this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button. Because you deserve stories that remind you your quiet strength is a force no one sees coming until it's too late.